Hello, I'm Lynn McAleer with the Sunday Symposium, and it's my great pleasure to introduce Kayleen Asbo, PhD. Kayleen is a musician, mythologist, an inspiring lecturer, and much loved here in Oakmont. She's on the faculty of lifelong learning programs at UC Berkeley, Dominican University, and Sonoma State University. Kayleen has been the cultural historian for the Santa Rosa Symphony for the past 5 years, and she's a pre-concert lecturer for the San Francisco Opera and the Mendocino Music Festival. For the past 20 years, Kayleen has been a faculty member at San Francisco Conservatory of Music. And just to give you a flavor of how popular Kayleen is, tomorrow, she's working a Zoom presentation for 20,000 people. So we are blessed to have Kayleen here today. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Kayleen.
Thank you, Lynn. I'm so glad to be with you all in Oakmont again, which is such a cherished place for me. I have so many wonderful memories of lecturing for Ollie there in the past few years. And today, we're going to be celebrating my earliest childhood hero, Ludwig van Beethoven. It is his 250th anniversary on December 16th or 17th. And what makes him so important today in our time this year is that he is a beacon of light, a hero that leads the way for all of us who are in desperate need of resilience, of hope, and of what I call the alchemical art of taking sorrow, disappointment, and even tragedy and transforming them magically, as he does in music, into beauty and healing balm for us all. So today, we're going to celebrate Ludwig van Beethoven, a hero who lights the darkness. In my own life, Beethoven was not an action figure, but I was 5 years old when I first heard the sounds of the Fifth Symphony. And even as a 5-year-old, it stirred something deep inside of me. As a child, during my own dark days, I would return again and again and again to that journey which biographer Jan Swafford has described as from tragedy to triumph. Little did I know when I was 5 that the seeds of my whole life's journey were planted in that encounter through music. A journey that I hope will inspire you today. So we celebrate his birthday on December 16th or 17th. We don't exactly know which one. We don't know what day he was born on because we only have records of his christening. He was born to these two people. On the left, you see his father, Johann van Beethoven. On the right, his mother, Maria Magdalena. And he was born in the small but charming town of Bonn, Germany. And in this town here, his father had a role as a minor musician, but he had great aspirations for his son. Now, take a look at that face that you see on the screen on your left, and I'm going to ask you, is that the face of a kindly father, do you think? Well, it certainly wasn't for Beethoven. In fact, not only was Johann van Beethoven known as the town drunk, but in his drunken stupor, when he would come home in the middle of the night, he would wake little Ludwig and shake him out of bed and force him down into the basement to practice in the cold and in the dark for hours. Neighbors wrote comments and left journals about how fearful this man was and how poor little Ludwig was the victim of what we would today classify as child abuse. By the time little Ludwig was a tender-hearted 8, 9, and 10-year-old, his father had decided that he wanted to take his talented but not prodigious son and turn him into the next Mozart. And so those midnight rounds of practicing into the wee hours of the morning were in hopes of creating a wunderkind like little Wolfgang, someone capable of bringing fame and fortune to the family. Little Ludwig at times had a technique that was too intense for the fragile harpsichord and fortepianos that he was practicing on. And in fact, in his very first public concert, a concert in which his father claimed that he was 2 years younger than he really was in order to make him more impressive, he broke several of the strings. And we know that whenever such things happened, Ludwig got a box in the ears, something that might have accounted for his later, more unfortunate condition. This is little Beethoven at the age of 13. And by the time this little boy had grown, look at those eyes, oh my goodness, looking at us plaintively with innocence and yet terrible sadness. By the time this portrait was painted, little Ludwig was in charge of his family's well-being. He was the breadwinner for his father, his 2 younger brothers, and his mother, who was desperately sick with tuberculosis. And it was really only because of the kindly intervention of his teacher, Christoph Neef, that he was able to find his way through this dark time of a tormented young adolescence with an abusive father. In his letter that he wrote to Neef as he sought his fame and fortune in the imperial city of Vienna, he wrote very tenderly, "If I ever become something, it will be because of you." Neef had tutored little Beethoven in musical arts, including the music of his own private hero, Johann Sebastian Bach. And so well equipped with a virtuoso technique and a depth of musical intelligence, Beethoven set off for Vienna. Here is Beethoven as a young man. Originally, he had come to Vienna to study with Mozart, but the news of his mother's death called him back prematurely. It was several years before he got back, and by the time he returned to Vienna, Mozart himself had died and was buried. So instead, he studied with Joseph Haydn, the father of the Enlightenment courts, as he performed his music. All did not run smoothly, however, with Joseph Haydn. Haydn, who was very gracious, always polite, always measured, crashed and clashed with his wayward student's temperament, because Beethoven had this spirit, this indomitable spirit that was given to emotional extremes. He wanted to create music that was as passionate as the emotions that were running inside of his own turbulent psyche, emotions that had been born from that tortured childhood and the death of his mother. So if you listen, and I hope you do, to some of his earliest pieces, particularly the piano trio, Opus 1, number 3, which is dedicated to Haydn, what you're going to hear is a raging virtuoso with bursts of anger. That particular piece was one that blew Haydn out of the water. He listened, and the last movement, which it erupts in one storm after another as the keyboard player plummets to the very depths of the piano and then rumbles with ferocity and then races to the top and then has this clangorous sound of what's known as the devil's interval of a diminished fifth, an augmented fourth, a tritone. Well, this was too much for Haydn, and he actually tried to dissuade Beethoven from publishing it, thinking that it was cacophonous and violent in its emotions. In his early days then, Beethoven was renowned for his piano playing. He was a piano virtuoso who, in the words of one commentator, was equally adept at sculpting with either velvet or steel. You'll hear both of those in the so-called Pathétique Sonata, the beginning which opens with intense, ferocious, storming chords that are dissonant and anguished, but then melt to profound tenderness in the middle movement before a whirl of tempestuous endings. So here he is, Beethoven, wayward student of Haydn, performer of velvet and steel. And the image that I love so much, that you can see the contrast between Beethoven and other musicians of the time, begins here. Notice that while the cello player and the others have their hair neatly coiffed and pulled back and in white powdered wigs, not so with our hero. There he is again at the piano. And what happened with Beethoven when he performed, particularly in the salons, is the stuff of legend. You can see here that the two men on the left are overcome by emotion. No one had ever poured so much terror, so much rage, so much longing, and so much passion inside of their music. Beethoven truly took his broken heart, and time again, he turned it into a kind of beauty that unsettled the soul and left his listeners quivering, shaking with emotion. Part of that emotion was because he was so unlucky in love. And in fact, when you listen to pieces like the Pathétique Sonata, the Moonlight Sonata, and For Elise, you should know that in part, each and every one of them was a failed marriage proposal. Beethoven was always falling in love with women who were too elevated in their station to marry such a commoner as he was. In fact, his first proposal to a young woman, a singer named Madeline, was rebuffed with the words, "What? Marry you? You're ugly and half crazy." But nonetheless, Beethoven took the aching longing inside of his heart, and he made people around, in listening to that, fall desperately in love, at least with his music. So he was this celebrity in Vienna, the most famous pianist of the age. He was concertizing with symphony orchestras. He was the musical toast of the town. And then tragedy struck again. He began to manifest a physical condition of acute agony. He lost his capacity to hear, and there was a constant ringing in his ears. Some biographers believe that this was because of those blows he sustained as a child by his abusive father. The end result was that he knew that he was growing deaf, and there was nothing he could do about it. His fame, his fortune, his status, all of those were imperiled. And he felt terribly foolish trying to say, what? A sense of growing isolation and alienation descended upon him. And he began to contemplate, what would life be like without his hearing? How could he continue on stage to perform when he couldn't even discern the notes of the others performing with him? So it was in this state of utter despair that he took himself off into the woods that he loved. And here at a place called Heiligenstadt in southern Germany, he wrestled with the question of Hamlet, to be or not to be. We know that he was contemplating suicide because of a letter that he wrote to his brothers that has come down to us as the Heiligenstadt Testament. And then this, he talks about the incredible loneliness that he endured, the pain that he was experiencing, the absolute anguish. At the end of this testament, he resolves, however, not to die, but to change. He will no longer, he says, write music for others. And in a letter to another friend, he wrote, "I am not satisfied with what I have composed up to now. From now on, I intend to embark on a new path." This new path was a way of unleashing the corset of the fetters that had bound him to the classical convention of Haydn and Mozart, music that was supposed to be, for the most part, well-behaved and orderly. Instead, everything took on a mammoth importance. His orchestra grew, doubled in size. He put more brass instruments in, more timpani. He required more of the virtuosity of symphonic musicians and of soloists alike. He doubled the length of a symphony orchestra, and he decided that it would all tell one story. And if you listen to symphonies like Symphony Number 3, 5, 7, indeed, it charts a hero's journey. We begin in the first movement with a certain sense of drama, of storminess. We descend into death marches, funeral marches of despair. And then we embark upon a path of blazing glory, of triumph, of resolve, of will, as if the orchestra, becoming Beethoven's voice, says, I shall not bow down, I shall not submit, I shall not go gently into that good night. I will rage against the dying of the light. And that's exactly what his music does, a journey from tragedy to triumph. Now, we want to remember that while he's doing this, the world around him is beset with terror. Where he was in Vienna was being bombarded by cannon shells. Napoleon had declared himself the emperor of Europe. And in fact, Beethoven, who had originally intended Symphony Number 3 to be named after him in homage as the Bonaparte Symphony, scratched it out, as you can see on the left-hand side, and instead calls his third symphony the Eroica, or Heroic Symphony, because he believed that Napoleon, who was supposed to go to battle for the common man, had betrayed him and the world by crowning himself as the emperor. The music, however, reflects the Napoleonic spirit of this age. Brash, bold, determined, militaristic in many movements. We have that call to battle and call to glory, and it stirred the soul, not just of the Viennese, but of all the Europeans who listened to it. This is the music of his so-called heroic period, the fourth and fifth piano concertos, the violin concerto, and the symphonies numbers 3 through 8. And when you listen to music of this period, I want to invite you to listen very closely for his signature motif. We find that, of course, most viscerally in that yep-up-up-bum, yep-up-up-bum of the Fifth Symphony, but you will find it in each of those other pieces that I mentioned, the 3 short, 1 long note, which Beethoven described as fate knocking at his door. With everything that was inside of him, he surmounted this tragedy. He found the inner resolve to break down the walls of convention, to create a new kind of orchestra, a new kind of music, a kind of music that set people's hair on end and their blood boiling with, rushing with spirit of hope and determination. But this is the image of Beethoven at the end of his all too short life. The face that you see here on the screen, I invite you to contemplate, is it filled with heroism? I think not. This is the face of a man who has surrendered to sorrow in some ways. The third period of Beethoven's composition is not the hero of the one who goes to battle dressed in armor. No, it's a different kind of heroism that many scholars call the spiritual period, the transcendent period. because Beethoven's ghosts and demons that he had wrestled with in the outer world with the form of his hearing and triumphed were not the only demons that he wrestled with. The shadow of his alcoholic, abused childhood lingered within him. And when he was given custody of his young nephew, he tried to parent in the way that he had known, pushing his young nephew to become also a virtuoso that he was ill-equipped for. And while Beethoven did not physically abuse his son, his adopted son, his nephew Karl, he certainly bequeathed to him a shadow of pain and a kind of parenting that left its own scars. In rebellion, Karl, with a broken heart, himself tried to commit suicide before ultimately joining the army. And the face that you see before you is the man who realizes that his own inner demons have caused pain and suffering in the world. For 2 years, Beethoven composed virtually nothing. And when he emerged out of this despair, it was a different kind of hero who came to greet us with the beauty of his music. Instead of raging off to battle, instead what Beethoven does is with sublime simplicity, offer us his tender and broken heart. This is the pathway of the hero on his knees with his heart broken open, and yet in this amazing place, what T.S. Eliot described as a condition of complete simplicity, costing not less than everything. Beethoven's heart was not just broken, it was broken open. It was broken open to hold the whole world. And so in this last period of music that he wrote when he was completely deaf, we think, maybe he could have heard a little bit of the Ninth Symphony at its full fortissimo volume, but most likely he could not hear anything of the late quartets or the piano sonatas that he wrote. Some of these works that he dedicated to the doctor who saved his adopted son Karl's life. And in these pieces here, what you hear is the most tender, aching, melancholy, but woven with such sweetness. Oh, it is amazing music. And if you haven't listened to it, I invite you in particular to listen to the slow movement of Opus 132, the middle movement, which bears the unlikely title of A Song, a Hymn of Thanksgiving from a Convalescent to the Deity in the Lydian mode by one who has come through. It was the song that Beethoven wrote after he almost died, after indeed he lost everything else that was precious to him. And yet, the music reaches down into the deepest parts of our being to offer us indeed a hymn of hope. My favorite story about Beethoven at the end of his life is of the premiere of the epic Ninth Symphony, a work that combines things that transcends opposites. At the time, symphonies were supposed to be instrumental, and then oratorios were supposed to be choral, and operas were supposed to be of high drama. And yet what Beethoven does is he weaves all of these things together. So we have this gigantic hour-long piece that charts his own journey, a journey that begins in terror, goes back into dance and celebration, emerges in the third movement to a song of sublime sweetness, and then comes to its grand climax in the fourth movement, where all of a sudden that enormous chorus rises to their feet and sings an ode to joy. The text of that last movement of the Ninth Symphony was a poem that had reached deep inside of Beethoven's heart while he was still a teenager studying with Christian Neff in the town of Bonn. He held that poem, which is a clarion call for all of humanity to find its place of integration, unity, and brotherhood. It expressed his heart's deepest longings and he labored for 30-some years to bring this to life. When he finally did, he stood on the stage in Vienna as the symphony played. At the end, we are told that the audience rose to its feet, cheering and stomping, but Beethoven didn't hear them. The soprano came to him and turned him gently to see all of Vienna, friend and foe alike, with tears down their face, clapping and cheering for this song of joy that was written by this man that he pulled out of the depth of his despair, the alchemical wonder of leading us to hope, to universal human brotherhood, and to joy. For his funeral, he did indeed have the funeral of a hero. 20,000 people attended this in the rain in Vienna. Schubert himself was one of the pallbearers here at the funeral. And Beethoven, while he was buried with great pomp and glory and honor, became even more of a hero after his death. That after his death, his influence echoed out. In this image that you see before you, you see Beethoven's legacy. Notice it is his bust on the piano there, and gazing in rapt adoration is the greatest piano virtuoso of the 19th century, Franz Liszt, as if he is looking at a holy relic. Clustered around the piano are some of the greatest luminaries of the Romantic age: Hector Berlioz, Giacomo Meyerbeer, Delacroix, Georges Sand, all of them gazing with adoration at Beethoven, who became the hero. And what was he most of all a hero for? Well, I would say it's from the words that are echoed in an early 1st century text found in Egypt, the Nag Hammadi library, the so-called Gospel of Thomas, which says, if you bring forth what is inside of you, what is inside of you will save you. What Beethoven was able to do over and over and over again in the course of his life is to alchemically, magically transform tragedy into triumph, suffering into solace, and brokenheartedness into beauty. It's an invitation for us all. What might we do? What might we do in this difficult and dark year to take these bitter seeds that we have been given with this COVID virus, with the fires that have swept through Oakmont, and harvest instead seeds of connection, seeds of dreams of a common humanity, seeds of beauty that might lead us to plant a garden of joy for future generations. So as you listen to Beethoven, and I hope you do, I want you to celebrate not just the beauty of the music, but that such beauty is possible out of the depths of sorrow, out in the middle of disease, barely recovering from a near-death experience, and most of all, possible to create even with a broken heart. If you'd like to listen in more detail to the Ninth Symphony and what it signifies, I invite you to find this link on YouTube. It's a 30-minute lecture I did on the Ninth Symphony for the Santa Rosa Symphony's performance a few years ago. And then, if you'd like to listen and know more about Beethoven's influence across the centuries, I want to invite you to join in a 6-week class that's about this alchemical transformation into beauty through the arts. The first of this series of Alchemy in the Arts will explore the relationship between Beethoven and the poet T.S. Eliot. Because just as the poem Ode to Joy by Friedrich Schiller inspired Beethoven to write the Ninth Symphony, so did Beethoven's string quartets, written in the depth of his own despair, inspire T.S. Eliot in the dark night of his life to pen his great masterpiece, the Four Quartets. And as you listen in the days to come, hopefully in the few days to come before I'm with you live in Oakmont for the symposium, I want to invite you to explore and find these works in particular. The works of the early period that are classical in style, but you can see the peeking out of Beethoven the Rebel in the first piano trio, Opus 1, number 3, and the Piano Concerto number 1 with its playful insouciance. At the end, the Piano Concerto number 3 in C minor when Beethoven first shakes his fists. And then those heroic pieces of music, the symphonies 3, 5, and 7, the Appassionata and Moonlight sonatas that he wrote in the midst of his growing deafness and in the middle of his broken heart. And then finally, the music of the transcendent period, Symphony number 9, To the Distant Beloved, a song cycle he wrote after the death of the only woman who ever loved him but was never able to marry him. And then the piano sonatas and string quartets. May Beethoven's music be balm of healing for your heart this holiday season. And may we all take inspiration from this hero, a man who leads us through the darkness to celebrate the light, who teaches us time and time and time again that no matter how painful our life circumstances, we too carry within us the seeds for joy.
Oh, Kayleen, thank you. You have closed out this 2020 difficult year with such a wonderful presentation. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
And everybody, I want to remind you that this is the final symposium for this difficult 2020 year. We ask that you join us for the start of next year's presentations, and that is on Sunday, January 10th, with Dr. Lance Morgan talking about conservation, marine life conservation. And we are going just to change our system next year. Instead of pre-recording and having the recordings available prior to Sunday, everything will be on Sunday mornings starting January 10th. So please join us at 10:30 live for Lance Morgan, followed by his Q&A. Thank you again from the bottom of my heart, Katie.
You're so welcome, Lynn. I'm looking forward to seeing all of you live on Sunday.
Yes, please tune in this Sunday at 11 o'clock for a live Q&A with Ms. Asbo. Thank you.